Floyd, we all know about the so-called media rights battle between ARC and SIS, and that itself has changed the sport of greyhound racing an awful lot. The way things are at the moment, do you think it's sustainable?
I don't think it's sustainable, but I don't like the end game, because at the moment we're struggling to provide decent quality racing. I think there are crack marks everywhere in terms of the calibre of open racing, in terms of graded racing with 4 and 5 dogs. Unfortunately, however it resolves itself, I think we will probably lose at least 7 or 8 tracks, whichever side wins, because going forward we're no longer particularly a spectator sport beyond the odd meetings. You go to the average greyhound meeting, even an evening meeting, I'm not just talking about this daytime stuff, you don't get crowds because society doesn't do that anymore. I often say to people when we're talking about, I don't know, perhaps going racing at Rye House back in the 70s, and I say, but listen, if those people were still around and they were still in their 40s and 50s, they would still be racing at Rye House. The reality is, a lot of them have dropped off their perch by this stage, and the younger generations, the people in the 30s, 40s and 50s, do not go out midweek in the way that we did, certainly when I was a kid. You know, you'd have your different 2 or 3 nights out, you'd go out. Now the younger generation, they've got Sky, they've got internet, they've got video games, they've got all kinds of things that we didn't have. So going forward, I think we'll only need a dozen tracks. It will be there to supply the betting industry. Where you might get a little bit of tweaking is the kind of thing here like at Henlow, where they have the very early morning meetings and perhaps later meetings, again to look at global betting and to go to a global market. But if you're looking at how many greyhound meetings do you need at any stage in a day, if you can send them around the world, you don't need that many.
So are you thinking of this as a good thing if there's around 12 tracks if we lose several, or is that a negative thing?
I kind of think it's I'd make sort of two responses to that. The first is whether I think it's a good thing or bad thing is kind of irrelevant, because it is what it is. And again, we almost see a similar situation to Ireland, where Ireland is going to lose 4 tracks, and the guys who are from those 4 tracks think it's a terrible thing. The guys from the remaining tracks think, do you know what, we're okay. And I think that would happen. From a business perspective, yes, I think there's a very good argument to say if we had 12 tracks, they could each financially operate on a much stronger basis. What that does, though, to things like trainers, breeding, on a wider scale, that's altogether a less rosy picture. How
important is welfare in all this? It's obviously tied up a bit in the media rights still. You have discussions about how often dogs run and having to find homes for all these dogs after they finish racing. How important to the future of greyhound racing is welfare? Obviously the GBGB are trying to make it a priority.
It's there's not even a discussion, it's just vital. Society's moved on. I've kind of used this story before, but I can remember saying to people when I was a kid, I can remember sort of my grandmother's generation, if they had a litter of unwanted kittens, they'd probably drown them. Now you get a lady puts a cat in a dustbin and she gets onto news at 10. Society has changed on its expectations, and unfortunately for the greyhound racing industry, we have a lot of they're kind of on their way out, but we have a generation that grew up with that idea that dogs were basically expendable, and that's no longer the case. I certainly don't see it amongst the younger trainers. I don't even see it along majority of the older trainers. I just think that there is an element that think, well, it's there as a tool. Unfortunately, we as an industry are perceived as all believing that to be the case, and I truly think that it's a very, very small percentage. Unfortunately, they bring the rest of us down. Absolutely.
I think tied in with that again is the fact that we need young people in the sport to have a future. You can't have a sport that runs without the people there to look after the dogs and take them racing. welfare obviously is incredibly important to young people, but what else do we do to encourage young people into the sport? And do you think we can have a sport in 20 years? Are there enough young people?
Not the way we're going, no. I mean, I was the one that pushed and pushed and pushed for these owner trainers licenses. And we've got a few now. I think there are, I don't know, probably 150 or something like that owner trainers. And we ran a story on the Star website about a young family up in Yarmouth where they literally brought a young bitch up from a puppy, and they take her racing. Now, to me, that's where my heart is. That is my absolute starting point in the greyhound industry. I was brought up flapping. You look after your own dogs, you take them racing, they're your pets, you enjoy racing them, and then you look after them when their careers are over. It's not difficult, it's a really simple thing to do. So unless we embrace that kind of mentality, we don't really deserve to survive as a sport. We really don't. You know, I look around the industry, and most of the people that I see are absolute animal lovers, and the others can basically bugger off as far as I'm concerned.
What about marketing and trying to get younger people in, just to get them racing maybe to start with, and then maybe, you know, a deeper interest in the sport? How can the sport market itself better?
I don't know. I mean, I think the one thing that's always occurred to me about greyhound racing is that we are a sport of very many types. Our audience comes from a wide variety of areas. In terms of, you get the guys who, the old-fashioned traditional punter, will go into the betting shop and just literally wants to follow some numbers. You've got the guy who's the form punter. You've got the person who wants to go out to the track for a night out for a party, maybe twice a year. You've got those who go every Friday night to Romford. In the first instance, I go back and say, well, let's get them into the track for any kind of reason, and it may even be an open day. I used to love the idea of the Breeders' Forum, where we'd have the people could come along and see litters of pups, and they could see the dogs and stroke the dogs. And I went to the very first one that was held at Northall back in, I think, about 1974, 73, 74, and that was a great introduction. And if for the other people it simply means going along to the track, I don't know, through the social media to get them involved and to get them for a night out, a percentage of them will show an interest. Majority won't. That's fine, because that's the same as any activity. It's not everybody's cup of tea, but I think if you get enough people through the doors. And the other thing on relating to that, which I think we are appalling at as an industry, and I pull my hair out, the discussions I've had with, going back certainly to the previous regime at the Greyhound Board, was why we don't show people and demonstrate to people at the tracks what goes on in terms of videos, in terms of even things in the race cards. You know, there are so many misconceptions about the number of greyhounds that are rehomed, about the number of injuries, about what happens to dogs, the numbers that don't chase, but we don't do a damn thing about it. We've always carried on and said, let's keep our mouths shut, because people will stop asking questions, but they don't. They want to know, so why don't we tell them?
Well, and again, what about the importance of social media? I know there are several young trainers and kennel hens out there that put fantastic videos and footage from their kennels on social media. I personally love that and think that's a massively important part of, you know, promoting the sport out there. Do you think social media is, you know, something that should be used more?
It's vital. I mean, I said I'm a dinosaur. You know, I'm kind of edging towards the end of my journalistic career, but certainly for the anybody that's going forward, it's something that they have to embrace, because it's not going away. Nobody's going to uninvent the internet. It's just going to become more and more sophisticated. The fact that Greyhound Star, when I originally said we were going to go online, and people looked at the age profile of our readers and said it's a waste of time, it was something we had to do. And you know, I've shown the graphics on site where we had one stage, 1 month, we had 26,000 individual users. That comes from the URLs, so to identify them as individual users. Now, we don't have that many people in the industry. I suspect we have a core audience, I don't know, not barely into 5 figures, and then beyond that you have some aunties who maybe came across a welfare story. We had things like a toaster story, which appealed to the people who were going to, you know, interested in toaster reopening, that kind of thing.